Man must rise above the earth, for only then will he fully understand the world in which he lives. The U.S. Air Force celebrates the men and women who for the past century have pushed the envelope of military aviation. We look forward to the next 100 years, doing the impossible.
Without further ado then, it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Roger G. Miller of the United States Air Force History Office.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah.
Rick, excuse me just a second. I'm going to interrupt Roger. Did everybody sign in? Please, if you haven't signed in, do so on your way back out. Did everybody get a copy of the little fact sheet with the application on the other side? We urge you to fill out the application, enclose your inheritance with that, and send it in to the post office box. And the website is on that application, which is primarily what I wanted to point out. They're bringing more chairs up, and there is one. Are there one? There were.
We have another half dozen places right up here, and it's okay. You can see very easily. Gene, if you want to come down. By the way, speaking right now to you about these details is the president of the First AeroSquadron Foundation, Bill Weiner, for those of you who don't know him. Most of you do. Yay!
I told you to stay in the pickup truck. I'm sorry, Roger. I'm turning it back over to you.
Turn it back. I've never got it. Yeah. Actually, I want to thank Rick Lambert for partly for the introduction, but actually he has been my contact here at Columbus since June of last year when we first started talking about my coming out here. Now, can you hear me in the rear? Okay, I'm going to be fighting a little bit on this. I'm fighting a sore throat among other things, but I'll try and pitch my voice back there as best I can. But there are still 4 seats on the front row, if anybody would like to get up here. Yeah. I would love to thank everyone by name who has welcomed me here to Columbus. But if I do that, 1, I'm going to forget somebody, and that would be offensive. And 2, we would be here for a long time because everybody has made me welcome, and I really appreciate that. I really appreciate y'all making me feel like this is home. And I don't use the word home lightly. I am from the Southwest. I grew up in San Antonio, know South Texas real good. Went to college originally in Denton, just north of Dallas. When I was commissioned into the Air Force in 1970, the Air Force immediately sent me over to Davis Mountain in Tucson, Arizona. And 10 years later, when I joined the Air Force History Program as a civilian, I came in Denver, Colorado.
No go off.
Light, I'm surprised. In Denver, Colorado, and in Denver I met a young attorney practicing in Cherry Creek, and she and I married 2 years later, and Chrissy's family is all from Phoenix, so I have this area pretty well bracketed, and it's nice to be back home. I probably should mention what the Air Force History Program is a little bit. I'm actually deputy head of the Air Force History and Historical Studies Office in Bolling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., and that is only a small part. That is the book writing part of our program. The Air Force History Program is really about 250 historians spread all over the world, collecting and writing the history of the Air Force on a daily basis at literally every base. And what they are doing is providing historical data to the commanders and their staff as part of the decision-making process. And Stephen Watson is one of our historians, came down from Kirtland. He's here. Stephen, where'd you end up finally? There he is. Stephen Watson came down, but he's one of the field historians in our program. And it's been, for me, a wonderful, wonderful effort. Found out about it in 1980. And I kept sitting there looking at, what is this? They want me to research and write history. this is wonderful, and they're going to pay me, you know. So it took me about 10.5 minutes to figure out this is for me. And the neat thing about it is I came into the program in 1980 and I haven't worked a day since. I just go down to the office and have fun, yeah. Or come out to places like Columbus and have fun. So it has worked pretty well. Again, I want to thank Rick Lambert and for all the people who have helped set this up. I didn't have to bring much of anything out here, but Rick, I did bring my watch as I promised. This is a very special watch. It's NASA developed. It has a sensor in it that measures the decibel level of snoring in the audience. And when it reaches a certain crescendo, I know I've done my job, I've put enough people to sleep, and I can quit. So this isn't open-ended. You know. Now, I think we need to turn the lights down because we can't see this thing. You know. Okay, we'll go from there. In June 1944, the Western Allies conducted the largest, most complex, really most hazardous military operation maybe in all history. We know it as D-Day, 6th of June, Operation Overlord. Yeah. By utter coincidence, on the same date, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point held its graduation. And among the newly commissioned officers was a certain John S.D. Eisenhower. 5 weeks later, young Eisenhower found himself in a Jeep in Normandy riding with his famous father. And it wasn't going the way he thought it should. They were going about 2 miles per hour down a road in bumper-to-bumper traffic with every kind of military equipment available, known to man at that time, under bright blue skies, perfect weather. It's what the U.S. Air Force terms in its argot a target-rich environment. And this isn't what he was taught at West Point. This wasn't according to the book. So he leaned forward and he tapped his father on the shoulder and got his attention. And he said, you wouldn't be doing this if you didn't have control of the air. Smart-ass second lieutenants, I know. Yeah. John later wrote that his father responded with an impatient snort. And he said, if I didn't have control of the air, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. And that's actually the whole thing. I told this story last year, actually on the 6th of June, at a D-Day celebration at the French Embassy in Washington, D.C. And the point I wanted to make was that it took nothing away from the heroism, determination, and skill of the men who landed at Normandy, who freed France, who broke down the German army and ended Hitler's obscene regime. It takes nothing away from them that none of that would have been possible without control of the air. In fact, I regard the U.S. Army as spoiled. They haven't had to fight without air supremacy really since 1943 in North Africa, 1942 in Java and in the Philippines. They have always had air supremacy. And what makes it apropos to what we were talking about today is that air control began here at Columbus in March of 1916 with the deployment of the first AeroSquadron and Captain Benjamin D. Falloy. Now, to be clear, air supremacy meant something different to John J. Pershing than it did to Dwight David Eisenhower. The 1912 Field Service Regulations of the U.S. Army assigned the aircraft two basic roles. Number one was that of observation or reconnaissance. They went out and looked over see what was on the side of, on the other side of the hill. This was not the U.S. Air Force. It was 1947. It was not the U.S. Army Air Forces created in 41. It's not the U.S. Army Air Corps from 1926. It is not even the Air Service of 1917, 1918. This is the aviation section of the Signal Corps. And the airplane was a communications device. And this is how Pershing used his force. Number one, he went out and he did observation, but they really weren't looking for Pancho Villa and his raiders as much as they were looking for Pershing's fast-moving cavalry squadrons. And they were also keeping an eye on the deployment of Mexican government forces, which posed a threat to Pershing, because the Mexican government was not real pleased with American soldiers moseying around Chihuahua. The second role, Pershing sent his airplanes out to communicate, drop messages to his wide-flung squadrons, or fly up and down the line of communications back to Columbus. So it meant something very different for him. It also needs to be set into perspective. These were eight unarmed training planes, and that pales in significance compared to what was going on in World War I at this time. Already World War I is 20 months old. The fighting overseas is horrific. The airplanes are playing a major role in that fighting. Essentially, in World War I, the great killer was heavy artillery. And the airplane, through its role as an observer, made heavy artillery that much more effective. So the airplane is contributing to the great devastation on the Western Front. Later, by 1916, it becomes important to seize control of the air so that your airplanes can operate and make sure that the enemy airplanes cannot operate. And so what you end up with at this point is air-to-air fighting between airplanes to gain control of the air. It's back to that control of the air again. That's dogfighting, which becomes the popular view of World War I. And by 1916, one historian has written that this is the year of the fighter. Airplanes are also intervening directly in the fighting. They're dropping bombs tactically. They're also dropping bombs strategically. There is actually an air offensive, German, going against Britain at that time. There is nothing like this going on in the United States at this particular point. Again, our airplanes are totally unarmed. So it's a whole different ballgame. Now, we'll go with the next slide. Most people know Columbus, what it looked like at that time, 1916. Columbus essentially here was created about 1902, and by 1916 this was a pretty much going concern. It had 3 hotels, it had a bank, it had a viable downtown. I think the population was about 300, 400, so it was very small, but it was active. I'm looking at in 1910, I'm going to be in your lap next. In 1910, the Mexican War broke out, and it quickly spread over into the border. And about 20 years ago, when I began researching the Punitive expedition, I stumbled across a file in the National Archives of letters from about every mayor in every little hamlet and city, from Brownsville to San Diego, asking for protection from the U.S. Army. I don't know the criteria that each request was judged on, but in 1912, Columbus met the criteria, and it ended up with a good portion of the 13th Cavalry, basically about 4 troops plus a machine gun troop plus a headquarters. This was Columbus at that time. I'm not used to using a pointer. Here we go. Columbus at that time, the business district was right in here. You can see the main railroad here, and then the road at that time, the Deming-Guzman Road. This is the railroad station at this point, Customs House at this point. The 13th Cavalry came in, and I learned yesterday that the buildings here are actually pretty new in 1916. They were in tents at first, but these, by 1916, were the 13th Cavalry Barracks and their stables to the right. Yeah.
Pretty much gone by now?
Yeah, that's all pretty much gone. In fact, it goes pretty early. I should, by the way, say, I think we have a small enough audience that if y'all have comments and so forth as we go along, go ahead and add them in. I want to make it clear that I am not Moses bringing the word down the mountain to the sinners in the village from Washington, D.C. This really is going to be a learning expedition for me. It will be very disappointed. In fact, you guys have local knowledge that I don't have, and I'll be very disappointed if I don't learn more on this trip from you that you learn from me. So anything that you have to contribute, I appreciate very much. I think I'm the only guy in Washington that doesn't have all the answers.
No.
Is that correct? Yeah. Thank you. Let's go to the next map. And I'm going to apologize for this map. This is as good as it gets. That's what it looks like in the National Archives, and it is very hard to read. Now, I'll try and point out the main things on it that are of significance. The railroad is basically this line right here, left to right. The the Deming-Gooseman Road is this one right here, and here's the railroad station, Customs House. The first thing that I was looking for when I saw this map, this is called the base of encampment. Pershing came here to establish a base for the punitive expedition, and I'm not going to go into all the logistical reasons that dictated this base, that he put the base here at Columbus. But he made that decision. The expedition actually departed here and Culberson's ranch over in Arizona at the same time on the 15th of March, 1916. On the 14th of March, Pershing issued an order that established the base of communications, and that's what he called it. It's not at this point Camp Furlong. But the thing that I was looking for at the base mainly was you've got to have a railroad track off of the main railroad tracks. There's got to be subsidiary tracks. I knew this also from Pershing's report, the Quartermaster Madden's report, in which he says when he got there, all these materials were being left in the boxcars and weren't being unloaded. In fact, they didn't even know what was in each boxcar. Well, they can't leave those boxcars on the main rail without upsetting all railroad traffic. So there had to be spurs off of it. The first thing I spotted when I saw this map was this spur, which curves off from going east to west, curves around, gentle curve, curves back a little bit, and you remember that hedgerow of herringbone of barracks? Yeah, thank you. Sometimes the words don't come. The hedgerow of barracks like this. The hedgerow of barracks is right here, and this spur runs down the west side of them all the way to this point. Yeah. That's the first spur. And there is a second spur that comes off the west over here and runs down to this point. Yeah. This gave me a basic, and you'll see why this becomes important in a little bit when I start looking at some other show you some photos. But at this point, it gave me an orientation that I needed very much when I was trying to figure out what the what the first Aero Squadron was doing. Now, the first Aero Squadron deployed, and they arrived on the 15th, late on the 15th, and they went into the barracks vacated by the 13th Cavalry. These again are those barracks. So that's where the first Aero Squadron went. Now, I blew this key up. All these buildings are numbered, and these are the keys over here. The numbers in the list of locations over here. And 83 through 89 is the first Aero Squadron buildings. And 83 and 89 is right here. at this point. Yeah. So that's where the first Aero Squadron was, and this map was made in August of 1916. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Just a question, Roger. You said they arrived. Where was their base?
Their base was San Antonio.
Okay.
They had built a aviation facility on the old machine gun range and remount station north of Kelly Field, north of Fort Sam Houston, and out on, nowadays it's out by what would have been the international airport in these days. You know. Yeah.
Excuse me, just a minute,
Yep.
Roger. If you could you repeat the question asked so that the people in the back can hear, because they're
Very good.
looking forward.
I'm sorry about that, and thank you. He asked me where the first Aero Squadron was based when they came down. They had been at the aviation school, the Signal Corps Aviation School down in San Diego out on North Island. They were detailed to Fort Sill to work with the fire school in late 1915, and in early 1915, late 1915, they then moved down to a brand new facility that was being built in the old remount section north of Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, and that was their permanent location when they were deployed for the Punitive expedition. So they came in and they went into here. This was at this point about 12 officers, 83 men, 1 civilian. They had 8 airplanes. I'll talk about the airplanes in a second. They had about 10 Jeffrey trucks, which become very important. And they had also leased some cats and dogs of trucks, so they had a total of 13 trucks with them. The other points on this map that are interesting, this spur is very important because according to one of the records, the Army shipped out something like 1.4 million board feet of lumber for construction, and most of that was unloaded. There's a huge mountain of wood right in here, lumber. Additionally, this is the first time that trucks are used in large amounts, in large numbers, so they need huge amounts of fuel. And the fuel storage is in this area. It's not very well defined on this map, but that's about where it was. So they needed to be able to unload this stuff right in there. The other point is Building 49 right here, this will become important later, is the YMCA. Yeah. The whole point of this structure, the base of communications, was to build up a series of depots to support the forces in Mexico. Virtually every bullet, every ration, every bale of hay, every piece of equipment, all the personnel, everyone who came in or went out of the Punitive expedition came through Columbus. And what I want to make very clear is that this was not a backwater. Most historians, when they write about the Punitive expedition, talk about Columbus for the few days that the expedition was here, and then they're off into Mexico, and they tend to ignore what goes on back here. This becomes a backwater, in other words. But that's not what is going on. This becomes a very active, very busy place and a very critical place for the Punitive expedition. Depots, the Quartermaster Depot. That's located here along the railroad spur. And basically that's everything, all sorts of equipment that the Army needs in Mexico. They also have absorbed very recently the commissary department that used to be separate. Now it's part of the quartermaster department. So that's all your rations and food that goes through here. You have an ordnance depot. The ordnance is machine gun bullets, rifles, equipment, anything to do with ordnance. Shells of any sort, there's artillery here. All that goes into the ordnance section, and that needs to be there as well. You have the Signal Corps. The Signal Corps is stringing miles and miles of telegraph line down into Mexico. You have to have the storage for the equipment, for the telegraph equipment, the radio equipment, they have some radios, and the miles and miles of wire, plus there aren't many trees out here. Have y'all noticed that? You know. So what do you do to get that off the ground? They have steel poles. So they're stringing miles of this down. Okay. Beyond that, you have the engineers. The engineers are basically corduroying roads, building bridges, doing anything they can to make the roads up and down the lines of communication work. So they have to have all of that kind of material. Plus there is something new, and that is the truck. Trucks had not been used before this time, and all of a sudden Pershing denied the railroad. Mexican railroad is off limits from Juarez to Casas Grandes. He has to use trucks. That's the only alternative. Previously, they would have used wagons, which were very slow and didn't carry much weight. Now he's going to use the truck.
May I ask a question?
Certainly.
I have a quick question. This sounds like a massive buildup for the purpose of a very, not to underestimate what Pancho Villa did, but it was relatively small. And this is an expedition that sounded like they were mounting it to take over, as if they were fighting a massive army, but wasn't the United States on the side of the Mexican Revolution and participating? Only Pancho Villa was left out of it, and he had a grudge. You know,
You're asking me to explain the entire.
Not to underestimate.
Yeah.
Underestimate
No,
what
this
he
is
did.
this is the logistics necessary to support the punitive expedition.
What was
Yeah.
their purpose?
Well, the question is, what was their purpose? What is the purpose of the Mexican Revolution? What side were we fighting on? Isn't this too big an effort for such a small? Well, what's going on?
Yeah.
It would take hours to explain all of this, but let me put it in these terms. We have 10,000, essentially about 10,000 men, about 8,000 animals. This is the logistics necessary to support that, actually 400 miles into Mexico. The goal, we get back to this, the goal, Pershing's orders were not to capture, kill, or find Pancho Villa. His orders were to capture or to harry the raiders who raided Columbus, New Mexico. Now there was this overkill. President Wilson would have to answer that question. This is the decision they make. Their concept was the United States should not be attacked, and they're going to punish whoever attacks them. So Pershing was sent in after these raiders. And his job was complicated by the fact that the Carranza government was unable to control Pancho Villa, who was a local, essentially at this point, a local leader, a warlord for all practical purposes. But Pershing's orders were he was not to get into a fight with Carranza, he was not to start a war. That was very important. And Pershing met, I'll say very quickly, he met all of the particulars of his orders. He was very successful in this. Yeah. That helped a little.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, okay, in addition to the Signal Corps, in addition to the Ordnance, in addition to Quartermaster, there's also the engineers I've already mentioned. Then we talk about trucks. Trucks are brand new, something totally different. And the problem was that Pershing never had trucks before. No one had them at all. So the first 27 trucks arrived. They were for a truck train. The quartermaster couldn't even put them together. They arrived as chassis plus wagons and were separate. The only organization that had any experience with trucks was the 1st AeroSquadron. And their AeroSquadron, essentially their participation in the punitive expedition can be divided into 3 sections. The first was about the first 4 days. when they primarily assembled their airplanes at Columbus, remained at Columbus, and then went to work on Pershing's transport problems. Number one, their trucks, all 13 of them, got involved in hauling supplies down into Mexico, hauling men down in Mexico. They even hauled Pershing's baggage into Mexico. Secondly, the machine shop truck that they had was used to assemble the first actual 54 trucks that Pershing had to send to form his first 2 truck trains. And these truck trains were basically trucks of anywhere from 1.5 tons to 3 tons in carrying capacity. So you can see very quickly, we're talking about some pretty good carrying capacity. That's 2 truck trains, you know. The third thing they did was they took the Falloy decided no one in the quartermaster department knew enough about trucks. Therefore, he volunteered to command Pershing's truck transport for the few days they were at Columbus. When they left Columbus, then they took their trucks with them. They left behind a crew still assembling those first 54 trucks. But when they left out about 4 days later, this last crew, part of the 1st Aero Squadron, that's what they had done. They put together 54 trucks. Pershing ultimately had 20 truck trains operating up and down his supply lines, 400 miles into Mexico. These were 30 trucks per train on the average, a little more, a little less. This was a big effort, hence the need for the gasoline storage up in this area. And this is the entire repair yard, maintenance yard for trucks. And so you'll see them come in, that's where they went, into that maintenance yard. This was something new in the Punitive expedition. Go to the next photo. I'm sorry, go to the next. I'm sorry. I'm first snoring. Yeah. Okay. This is again the same area, except the other photo, the other map was really this area right in here, a small area. This is a much larger area. Again, you have the railroad line here. You have the Deming road down to the border here. You have railroad station, customs house. The other point in this is there's a big stack of hay right here, huge mountain of hay. Hay is the horses don't necessarily eat it. American horses are grain fed, but what they are doing is that's what they clean with, that's what the stables with, that's what they protect the horses with. There's a huge mountain of it right here. Over here you can see the word airfield. And this is the field that the 1st Aero Squadron flew out of. It's quite a ways east of the main encampment over here. And you can see 8 squares along this road. And I'm firmly convinced that these are the 8 tents, 8 tent hangars of the 1st Aero Squadron. The road here, I'm going to give it a name. This is not its name, but I'm going to call that the East-West Road, and you'll understand why in a second. We'll go to the next photo. Yeah. Now this is something that's a little different, and I apologize, I am not a cartographer. The report of the commander of the base of communications at one point says that the Pershing has ordered him to expand the camp because the Punitive expedition is going to return at some point or another. So he begins to lease land from owners in this area for that new camp. And it was all laid out in tab L to his report. Of course, there is no tab L in the National Archives. I have searched, So I called the Luna County people up in Deming. They sent me out a plat map. And fortunately, the guy listed each of the leases that he had set up. So I did my best to place these on a plat map. This is current, modern Columbus. These are the plats, believe it or not, that were listed on that report. They aren't south where you would expect, they are north. More important, I've put this in, this guy right here leased this area, but it also included a well. Now the well is not in the middle, it is somewhere in that block, but that's all I know, there was a well. Okay, he got $500 a year for that lease. This guy right here, there's two of them right here, they don't have a well. So they got $1 a month. Water is expensive, They're here, this section, a well was dug by the quartermaster. Here, a well was dug by the quartermaster. Here is a leased well, this guy got $500. This was a leased well from the quartermaster. There were two buildings of some sort down in this area that was leased by the Army. They didn't get any more money for the buildings. However, this, kitchens, latrines, bathhouses for the 1st Massachusetts Infantry. At this point, what is clear is that this is the center of the camp, and it's well to the north of old Columbus. And that became a surprise to me. This is called New Camp. We'll go to the next one. This is the train going through. Everybody else, there's no grass to watch grow, so you go down to visit the train. In the back, I thought, my initial thought was that this must be going east because there's so many military buildings back here, tents and so on. This must be the camp. However, and I verified this by climbing on that hill yesterday, that mountain right there, this is north to the west and slightly north. This is north of the railroad. This is, I think, a picture of New Camp. Go to the next one. This is another picture. This is looking southwest slightly. You remember the railroad spur that curved. Here's the railroad spur curving. Down in here is a car on it, and it goes like this down there. These buildings are the barracks of the 13th Cavalry, abandoned and now used for other purposes. This is the the quartermaster storage areas. And you're looking here at the camps of the 1st New Mexico Infantry. Another one of the units was there. This is south of where we are right now, directly south. This is a pump house, did we decide? Pump house right here. This orients us a little bit. Remember I mentioned the east-west road? Right here. Go ahead. Next one. This is taken slightly to the west of the previous picture. You notice a truck train assembling here. This is the road to the border. And here's that curve, and the curve back down to this point. Again, you can see the barracks areas and the storage areas. This should be the headquarters, from what I can tell, according to that map. This right in here. We'll go, I think that was the main one. Go ahead. The 1st Aero Squadron went into barracks here. This is Vernon Burge was a sergeant who later became the first enlisted pilot for the Air Force. But this is his handwriting. This he called the overcrowded storage house, this building. So obviously they're storing stuff here, and you can also see these are aircraft elements, wings, tails, and stuff being stored outside. This is the barracks for the Aero Squadron. This is the cookhouse cook shack right here. There's a stack of lumber right there next to it. And the covered area is, the shaded area is the enlisted mess, and this is the officer's mess on the other side of the kitchen. You can see a boxcar here. This is that railroad spur going south behind these buildings. Go ahead. Yeah. The first Aero Squadron unloaded its aircraft, its equipment. This is a Jeffrey truck that they used. Most of the unboxed, the uncrated, they took it over to that particular field that we saw in the earlier map. They flew out. Their aircraft was the JN-3 Jenny. That one back there is a pretty good replica of it. Yeah. They had 8 of them that they took into Mexico. They lasted exactly a month. Yeah. 6 were crashed or destroyed. 2 returned on April 15th with Pershings when they came back out of well, I'm going to back that up again. I'm not saying this right. What happened was that Pershing had a mobile offensive going for the first month. Then about April 12th, 13th, he halted. He brought his forces back. They took up occupation areas in Mexico and stayed there, harrying. Each regiment harried the bandits in its particular area, and he maintained that position. In the meantime, the 1st Aero Squadron returned to Columbus. In Columbus, it set up in its tents once more. It brought back only 2 surviving airplanes, and it immediately condemned and destroyed those 2. So it had no airplanes. It had, at that point, found 4 new aircraft awaiting its returns. These were Curtiss N-8s. The squadron took one look at these aircraft and realized they weren't much of an improvement over that, and so they condemned them and shipped them off to the school at San Diego. On the day that they sent them off, the first of the new R2s arrived. And from then on, the 1st Aero Squadron, for the rest of the time, maintained the R2s, about 12 of them are there at Columbus. So they had a very active flying field here. They maintained 2 deployed to Casas Grandes, which was Pershing's headquarters down there. And these 2, with rotating pilots, rotating aircraft, served as a communications and navigation function for Pershing's headquarters down there. To give an example of what this amounted to, I've said that that Floyd brought in 12 officers with the initial deployment, but ultimately 30 aviators served with the 1st Aero Squadron. So he had a lot of people rotating in and out. In addition, he was running a test and evaluation center here. They were bringing in other aircraft of different sorts and testing them. They ran into a number of problems. One of the problems with things like, well, when the initial R2s came in, they were so badly built and poorly constructed, and they were missing lots of parts. So his units had to spend all their time rebuilding these aircraft almost from the ground up. Curtiss had totally lost quality control at his factory. And all of this was dumped on Floyd. He had a real problem with propellers. The propellers started delaminating in the heat and sun of this area. So they actually had propeller specialists come down here and build propellers for them to try and make this work. And this was a very important thing. There's one Lieutenant Christie that I'll show you a photograph of later, who at one point had an R2, the propeller delaminated, exploded, the engine over-revved, jumped completely out of the engine bed, fell down into the undercarriage, was only hanging on by a few pipes and electrical connections, things like that. And somehow he got the nose down so he didn't stall and managed to land the airplane. In another case, In another case, they found that the dope that was used, the clear stuff that they were used to tighten the fabric, was melting in the sun. That was a problem as well. They ran into all sorts of different problems. Go ahead and go to the next one. Again, this is unloading, and this is on the main track, and you can see this is the, I understand that this is just to the other side of the west of the customs building, is that right? Or is it just east of the customs building? Does anyone know? Yeah. It's somewhere right out here, just right almost where we are. They're unloading over this depression. Go ahead and next. Yeah. And again, it's an all-hands effort to get these wings undone. Go ahead to the next one. Yeah. And this is what a Jeffrey truck looks like with men on top of it. Go ahead. Yeah. And again, they're getting their trucks all lined up and equipped. Yeah. I love those old trucks. They had four-wheel drive, four-wheel steering, and four-wheel brakes. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. This is going down through, and I'm pretty much convinced that this is what I've called the east-west road, and is going east. Here again is that pump house top, and this is the YMCA building. Yeah. And so in here should be that road going down to the border, running across this. I believe that's correct. Yeah. Go ahead and go to the next. I showed you the 8 hangars in that map. And here's your 8 hangars. This is not a very good photograph. The next photograph will show it a little better. Go ahead. Yeah. This is an R2. Fortunately, its engine has not jumped out of the airplane yet. Yeah. These are the hangar tents. And there are essentially 8 of them along there. And this, therefore, would be that flying field. And that's the one thing that you have to understand, that I'm having a lot of trouble with some of the people I've been talking to. This is not a field with runways. It does direction in it. It is just a big field. So you take off, which direction do you take off? You take off in whatever direction the wind is blowing from. Doesn't matter. Go ahead. Yeah. They had an engine repair shop that they built out there. This is not a very fancy. It does have a wooden floor. Beyond that, it has probably wooden walls, maybe a tin roof. I'm not totally certain on this. You can see there's a lot of amenities. He's sitting on the floor to work on the engine. Go ahead. Yeah. This is the engine shop again. They've got the cylinders off of this is a VX engine from a Curtiss R2. Go ahead. Yeah. This is the shop where they're working on the engines. What they have is they back a Jeffrey truck up to this. They have a derrick on the truck. They lift the engine up. Go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah.
Sir?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many hours they would get on an engine before they'd have to pull it in?
Not many, but I don't know. I don't know that the rattle fan, no.
Question so they can hear it out.
Oh, he asked me how many hours you got on an engine before it had to be rebuilt. I don't actually know. Not very many. These engines were pretty primitive. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. This is the propeller shop. You can see it's a sophisticated area. A tent. Yeah. A tent with a dirt floor. And this is where they built propellers. Go ahead, next one. Same kind of thing. Again, it's a very sophisticated building. Yeah. For the time, no, it's a field thing. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. They built one other structure out there. They built an engine test stand. This is Vernon Burge, by the way, the first enlisted pilot in a few years. And here they're sinking, this is concrete, they're putting in, sinking the feet of the supports into the ground there. Go ahead. Yeah. This is the engine test stand. Not a very good picture, but they've got an engine mounted up in it, and that makes a lot of difference in your ability to test and use engines. Go ahead. Yeah. One more picture of the test stand. Here's the propeller that they'll mount on the engine after it's put up there. And go to one more picture. They tested many different aircraft. This is one of my favorite. It's a real dud. It's a Curtiss Twin. Basically, it's a Curtiss Jenny with 2 engines, one on each side. They had about 9 of them. They didn't fly very well, so they got rid of them ultimately. Go ahead. Yeah. That's one when they're trying to fly it. Yeah. One more time. Yeah. Yeah. And these are the Curtiss R12s, R2s. R2 was a bigger, beefier, stronger airplane, has 160 horsepower rather than a 90 horsepower engine, and they had essentially 12 of them. This is, I think, a total of about 6 of the aircraft out in front of the hangars again. Go ahead. Yeah. Curtiss R2, again, beefier. You can tell it really by the tail. You can tell them very quickly. They also have a much stronger undercarriage, which doesn't help a lot. The red star, by the way, is the symbol of the 1st Aero Squadron at this time. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And this is one coming in dead stick. And you can see again, this is just a field out here. There is a fence, but that's about the only amenity. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. And his further landing. Yeah. One more. Yeah. There was, and I found this out after I came out here, there was winds were a very big problem in this area, as we've all noticed. Yeah. And at one point they had a small, I don't know if they had actually a dust devil or whatever, but high winds blew down a couple of the buildings and destroyed 3 airplanes. Caused about $13,000 worth of damage. Yeah.
In today's dollars.
Go ahead. Yeah. More likely, what was more likely is that they would hit and do a ground loop, turn around, and tear the landing gear off of it, which is what's happened to this aircraft. And the way they deal with this, go ahead, you know, they haul the truck up behind it, put that sling under the nose, jack the nose up, they brace it right in here, and they build the landing gear underneath it. Go ahead to the next one. This again is the same kind of thing. You can see they've got all of this going on to stabilize it and build that new landing gear underneath it. Go ahead. Yeah. And at this point they're done. A lot of them, this is like DC workers. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. And at this point they're done. They've still got the bracing underneath it, but they are now putting the propeller, new 4-plated prop on the engine, and they'll get ready to fly out from there. Go ahead. Yeah. Rain was also a problem here, water. Yeah. And I came across this. They have a machine shop truck of some sort here, and the car is stuck in pretty heavy mud and water. Go ahead. Yeah. So they pull a line out here, and they pull the car out of the water. Go ahead. Yeah. And I thought at first he was trying to hook the thing up, which didn't make any sense. And then I suddenly realized they don't have electric starters. He's in there cranking for all he's worth, you know, trying to get that started. You know. And again, he has supervisors watching. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. As I said, they deployed these aircraft down to Casas Grandes. This is a ground crew down at Casas Grandes with an R2. Go ahead. Yeah. This is Lieutenant Christie that I talked about. The one thing about these aircraft is they still had, and one of the things they will do with the R2s, they still had the Curtiss control system in it. And the Curtiss control system is not what we use now. What we use now is called a single stick system or the Depredustin system. Single stick system is just like this with your feet doing the rudders. The Depredustin system is basically the same thing. It's elevator, aileron, rudder again with your feet. Curtiss system is totally different. You have a stick, elevator. You have a wheel, rudder. You have a harness that goes around your shoulders, and you lean for your ailerons. Yeah, that's what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah. It's fine until you want to check 6. You know, you're in trouble. Yeah. Go ahead. And this is Lieutenant Rader, who is my idea of a pilot. small, big mustache, tough-looking face. Go ahead. Yeah.
Dr. Noy, I have a question here.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just a comment. You know that Curtis was big into motorcycles as well.
Very much so.
And you think that the leaning thing had something to do with that motorcycle influence?
If you'll notice the Wright brothers are into bicycles. How do you turn a bicycle? The way you turn a bicycle is you don't turn it the direction you're going. The first thing you do is you actually turn the wheel away from the direction you're going to turn because you destabilize it, all right? And then you lean and you bring the wheel back to control that lean. I have no doubt that, and the right control system is vastly different, by the way, but I have no doubt that the fact that they worked with bicycles and Curtis worked with motorcycles had a lot to do with their ability to learn to fly. That's basically all I'm going to say about the 1st Aero Squadron. They stayed here until roughly May, June, July 1917. And from here, they did not go back to their regular base. They turned in all of their aircraft, and the men and officers went overseas to France, where they joined the first observation group and received new airplanes. So these men who were flying here will ultimately be, a year later, will be in France fighting in World War I.